everybody, Julie Weeb here. Today what I'd like to do is answer some questions I've been getting regarding the recommendations that I make to my athletes about not going overhead when they have a diastasis when they're pregnant. So let me talk you through the reasoning, the clinical reasoning that I have for that recommendation so that you'll know better how to apply this and if this applies to you. If you're a mama watching, but if you're a pro, to understand the reasoning behind it will help us not turn this into a rule or a formula, okay? I want you to understand how I apply it, why I apply it, and when I apply it, and so that you can take that into your practices and use it really judiciously. So let me run you through a little bit of an anatomy lesson in order to help start our conversation. And so what I've drawn here, this is the sternum or the breastbone, this is the rib cage, and this is the pelvis. The red is your abdominals. This is the rectus abdominis. That's all I've drawn, but it's enough to understand that the abdominals hook on to your rib cage and your pelvis. And so what happens at the rib cage affects the abdominals, and what happens at the pelvis affects the abdominals, and vice versa, okay? These structures and muscles work in unison, okay? They're influenced by one another. And so this is the rectus, okay? And this is the linea alba in between, that's the fascia. And so we get this mild separation. Most women get a separation during their pregnancy. And again, to keep reinforcing out there, communicating to you women that are watching, professionals, if we can communicate to women, this is a naturally occurring process. It doesn't necessarily mean pathology, okay? It's really important that we communicate that out there, okay? So what happens though, when you go overhead, is there's a tendency for the rib cage to follow the shoulder. So as the shoulders go up, the rib cage tends to go up and out, and the abdominals follow the rib cage. And again, I am sharing with you my clinical experience. We need a lot more research around this, okay? But as the arms go up, there's a tendency for the rib cage to pop up and open, and that opens the abdominals. And what I see, you can see it here in the picture, and what I tend to see with a lot of my athletes is that they end up with a V-shaped diastasis. So it's wider at the top and smaller at the bottom. And this is true not just for my athletes that load overhead or lift overhead. This is my runners, okay, because they run with their chests up. I call it bell rung up. I think of the rib cage as a bell ringing off the shoulder girdle. And if your bell is rung up in your fitness, you're reinforcing that position with your running, with your lifts, and then you're taking and reinforcing and using your abdomen in a splayed open V'd position, okay? And so I have a lot of women that as part of our rehabilitation, I have to get them out of the use of their they only know how to use their abdomen out here. Okay, we need to relearn how to connect and use the abdomen toward the center because they've used it in this splayed open position in their fitness for such a long time. And then the other thing to understand in function is that mamas their rib cages are widening and starting to splay simply because the belly is growing. The rib cage kind of gets out of the way. So not only is there, day to day, the rib cage is starting to assume that position, but then they're reinforcing it in their fitness. So what I ask them to do is to instead of, for example, a ball slam. So if you're doing a ball slam, instead of going overhead to do it, I just ask them to do it from shoulder level. And what I'm doing is I'm naturally asking the rib cage to stay in without them having to overthink, I gotta keep my rib cage in, okay? By restricting that overhead activity, I'm sort of imposing a naturally occurring boundary around the rib cage, if you will. And so trying to get the rib cage to stay in naturally and be reinforced in that position. So another one I love to do is a goblet, because automatically the rib goblet squat, I'm automatically pulling that rib cage in just naturally. Because one of the cues out there that I'm not a huge fan of is use your abs to pull your rib cage forward. And the reason for that, we want abs working, don't get me wrong, okay? But we want them working in response to the demand, appropriate to the demand. And so if you're pulling your abs to get your rib cage down, you're basically going to restrict your breathing. So do that. Try to pull your rib cage forward, use your abs to do it, and now take a breath. It's hard, okay? And one of the other major tenets that that I use with my patients, I gotta have them breathing, okay? Especially under load while they're pregnant, particularly if they have a diastasis. Because if they're breath holding or their breath is restricted, we're gonna see the pressure transferred to the weakest link, okay? And for some of these ladies, it is a diastasis. Others, it's down and they're gonna leak, or we're gonna have pressure against pelvic organs. And so we wanna keep them breathing well. We wanna keep that breath in association with the abs, in association with the pelvic floor, working together as a system. I have lots of videos on my site, lots of blogs, so that you can kind of understand that whole system better. So the next piece of that puzzle, now we sort of understand why and how I make those recommendations to sort of naturally rein in the rib cage for our patients to optimize where the abdomen is, to optimize its mechanical advantage, help us start to heal up that diastasis. But the other thing in pregnancy is the when. Like, when would we start to tell our athletes, well, maybe we should, stop going overhead? And the reality is that depends, okay? It really, I would love to say start this at week X. But because women carry so differently, because we don't know how to predict whose fascia is going to thin more, who's genetically predisposed to thinning of the fascia, and we don't know, for example, like how you carry in your first is very different in how you carry in subsequent pregnancies. You usually show faster in later pregnancies, so you may need this recommendation much earlier. And so the idea there is monitor and modify. It's one of my favorite phrases with my patients, my mentorees, is we need to be monitoring what's happening. And if we're starting to see that we're getting a diastasis and we want to sort of manage that, quit exaggerating it and emphasizing it, and instead encourage them into movement patterns that keep the abdominals in a position that has better mechanical advantage, and helps them create tension over the fascia in a positive way, then that's where we can move to, and then we can keep them moving without necessarily having them stop any of the fitness that they're enjoying, okay? And hopefully that will continue to reinforce something positive over that diastasis, okay? And so, but in general, where I tend to see this starting to sort of tip is somewhere around halfway, give or take a couple weeks, either on either side. But again, that's not a firm rule, okay? But it is something that it's when you start to see changes. Like if you have to like change how you're buttoning your pants, you may have already started to have a bit of a diastasis. And if you have to move the bar around your belly, okay, like if you're switching to dumbbells, that is likely a time when it would be a good time to start thinking about this as an intervention. Again, it's really important for you to understand the reasoning behind it and for you to apply it well, and for you to know how best to help our athletes and to give them the message. I'm giving you the message, athletes, if you're watching, that this is meant to be an intervention that is time limited, okay? My goal, my job is to teach you how to go overhead without splaying your rib cage, okay? It's possible, and that's my job. Part of that shoulder mobility, part of that is strategy. You've learned to do that, okay? And we need to unlearn it, and we can do that with breath mechanic changes. We can do that through form changes, and we can do that, and we can even do that within pregnancy, if you can pull that off. And that's why I'm saying, like, this may not apply to everybody. Not everybody gets a diastasis that we need to be concerned about. Not everybody shows like that. Some people have super long torsos. Everybody's a little bit different. But if you can watch yourself lift, you can see what you're doing, then you can start to make some changes, okay? So all of that is, hopefully, it's a lot of information. Hopefully it makes sense, and it's something that you can apply for yourself or for your clients. You can send me questions to try to help clarify. But anyway, happy lifting.